And yeah, the answer is that no, I don't have any problem finding new artists. There's a lot of bands that reach out to me. They seek out interest in working with Sell the Heart Records.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, it comes in a lot of different ways. A lot of times it's just an email, cold email saying, yeah, like we like what you're doing, and we're interested in wondering if you would be interested in working with us and releasing our record. But very often too, it'll be more of like a friend of a friend scenario where a band that I've worked with, has other friends that are in bands, and maybe they've seen that their record came out and it, maybe turned out great, or, is doing well. And so, like for instance, Heavy Seas, they kind of got turned on to me through the guys in Next Scars. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, what's another example of that? That I can think of off the top of my head. Sorry.
No worries.
I mean, it's happened a few times, but I mean, there's other bands who I won't name who have reached out to me through that channel that I haven't worked with, and it's either because like we just didn't find an agreeable situation, or, I mean, sometimes it's as simple as, yeah, I'm just, I think you guys are great, but it's just not really for me,
Okay.
But yeah, short answer, there's no shortage of bands that are seeking out working with the label. Yeah.
So here's what I wanted to ask you about when it comes to the difficulties and getting a band that's interested in signing with you, but the expectations there, because I think you've shared before on more than one occasion about it, but I think what I'm mostly focusing on is if they have expectations, not knowing how the business works and what they believe that you are meant to do to help them. Because I know before in the past you've talked about that. I think you're more like a silent partner. You want to be more like a silent partner for the band, but it's mainly just coming from the point of we're getting the record released for you, and if there's some other way we can help out, we will do that in that capacity. But everything else could be entirely up to you how you want to go about and promoting the record and releasing the record, or I'm sorry, in preparation for touring or whatever the case may be. If you have a group that is expecting you to do all the other heavy lifting in that respect, and one, how do you break it to them and telling them that we're not going to do that? Two, if you tell them and they are understanding but they don't get it, how do you deal with that aspect of it as well too? Because I'm assuming that there's going to be various personalities and various understanding, and therefore a lot of difficulties may come with that, where I think some people may not understand that from your position that it could be, I would imagine, be a little difficult on how to conduct yourself in those situations with the various personalities you're going to be dealing with. Well, one person who's the leader of the group is easier to talk with, but someone else now is going to chime in and want to hear what they want to hear, disregarding what the other person had agreed to. So I'm wondering if you have a little bit of that and deal with that on somewhat of a frequent basis. And if you do, how you go about and conduct yourself in that respect.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really great question. Because yeah, different personalities in different bands can present those situations uniquely. And right out of the gate, what I try to do is that when I'm first speaking with an artist, especially for the first time, and maybe their music has piqued my interest, and I'm thinking, okay, like this is good, and I'd be interested in like continuing this conversation. One of the first questions that I ask is, what are your expectations of what I'm going to do for you as a label, right? And, from whatever their answer is, we then kind of dictates how the conversation is going to go. And, to your question of, well, if they have certain expectations that are outside of the scope of what it is that I'm actually capable of providing for them, right, I'm pretty quick about trying to kind of tamp that down and say, okay, well, that's not what I can do for you. You're going to have to seek that out somewhere else if that's what you want. Right. Like, so for example, I'm happy to help bands with booking shows if they want that. That's something that I can do, but it's not something that I'm going to automatically just offer everyone. And it's not going to be something that I'm going to be able to do all the time. It's going to be more like, yeah, like if you need help filling in like gaps somewhere, or particularly if you're coming out to the West Coast, like I have a lot of connections on the West Coast, but I don't really have any in like say Texas, you know.
Okay.
I mean, well, that's not even true. Like I do have contacts in Texas, but I was just throwing out a random state as an
No, I
example.
understand. I know what you're saying.
But you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm not a booking agent, and I'm not
Right.
going to be your booking agent. That's not my job as a record label. My job is to do certain things. And like really what it comes down to is my job is to facilitate the production of a record, like the physical format. Sometimes it's even actually to handle the digital distribution of it. More often than not, I actually prefer that the bands handle the digital distribution of it, like through like Spotify and stuff, because it's just so much easier that way for them to like retain all of the like the ownership of the digital scope of that. You know, I get brought in as like a partner on that often, not always, but most of the time. And then there's other things like helping to facilitate the logistics of the release, the logistics of, doing premieres, the logistics of handling different types of promotion, whether or not it be through social media platforms or through, ad campaigns, or, trying to get them into blogs or into podcasts, talking about them on podcasts that I'm on,
Right.
all of that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, it's like the distribution of the music itself on a physical level, like once the music's there,
So you mentioned something in social media. I think it was you, if I recall correctly, where the responsibility of creating the social media, I'm sorry, I meant to say the physical releases of a record that's coming out. And one of the things, and again, I believe it was you that may have said this on your social media accounts, where you have asked artists that if you want us to do a physical release of your new record, make sure you have the following prepared for us to do this job for you, because this is not cheap and it's expensive. And, for us to have everything prepared and then we don't get anything out of it here, as far as demand is concerned, we may not be able to pull this off in the long term for you or for maybe other artists along the way that are expecting for that to happen there. So I'm curious about how those particular demands, when it comes to, we want a record label, we want you to release an actual vinyl for us here, and we want to have X amount of printed out here because we have friends and family that may want to buy it here. But there's still that doubt that, are you sure you want to do that? Because we hear that all the time, but we're not sure that it's going to be, the demand is going to be out there. Not saying that because you're not any good, it's just that physical media is not a thing that most people are looking out for, because that's a niche market. So you have to be 100% sure that with the amount of responsibility that's going to be coming with that, you're prepared to deal with what is going to be coming from that if it doesn't meet those expectations you have in mind. So I'm curious to hear about that side of the dealings when it comes to artist expectation in that respect, where it's not going to be what they think it is.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a constant. I wouldn't call it a battle. I like battle is maybe not the right word, but like it's just something that kind of is always on the surface.
Right.
Whenever you're getting into a relationship with an artist from a label's perspective, because I work with bands of varying degrees of quote unquote popularity, right?
Okay.
So I've got some bands that have a very good track record of selling a lot of copies of their record. Like, so they've released multiple records, and most of those records have either sold through or sold the vast majority of what they've produced, right?
Right.
And they probably have a really good following on like their Spotify, and they do a lot of stuff on like they have a lot of followers on like Instagram and Facebook, like all those things, right? And then I also work with bands that are literally brand new. This is their first record. They're coming out of the gate real hot with a really great record, but they don't really have any proven track record.
Right.
And that's hard because like who's a great example of this is actually Next Scars. So Next Scars is a band that had released some stuff digitally prior to working with me, but they had never done anything on a physical level. And these are guys that have all been in the music scene for a really long time. They are in other bands. They've played in bands. They know the drill. They definitely understand all of those things that kind of come with starting a new project that you're starting from scratch. Like there's not always an automatic carryover from your other projects, because the other bands that the guys in Next Stars are in, they have their own following. But it could be a different type of music altogether, and people that are following that band may have no interest in Neck Scars, right? So with Neck Scars, as this example, I had to pose the question of like, okay, well, what is your expectations? Like, do you honestly think that you can move 300 copies of a record? And we went back and forth a little bit, and what we ultimately decided on was to do 200 copies, and we did some CDs as well, right? And to me, it's not so much that 200 versus 300 was like this magic number that was all of a sudden going to make a lot of difference, because in all honesty, like it was actually kind of more expensive to do 200 than it was to do 300, because you get a better price break when you do 300 versus 200.
Oh, like a bundle pack type of thing?
Well, like the price per unit comes down a little bit, right?
Okay.
It wasn't like a ton of money, but it was like a little bit, and but really what it kind of boils down to is like physical space, like having an extra 100 copies of a record that may or may not go anywhere. Like if you do that for every single artist, it starts to add up, and then you literally run out of room in your, like I live in a 2-bedroom apartment, so I can't do that for every single band, like potentially have an extra 100 copies of a record that may or may not go anywhere. So to me, the idea of doing 200 versus 300 felt more comfortable,
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? So but I guess more to the point, it's a conversation that has to be had, and depending on the artist and kind of digging into their history and determining kind of from a gut feeling, as well as just using your data that you have of, okay, like for an example, Decent Criminal, like they've released multiple records and those records have sold really well. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I was like, cool, we can totally do 300 copies. No big deal. Like that's fine. Right. But for a band like Neck Scars, who's brand new, and I love the album, and they're great dudes, and they've stayed active and they're doing a lot of great stuff. I mean, the album's almost gone. Like I only have a few copies left,
Interesting.
And it's a year old now. So I only have I have fewer than 10 copies left, and the band I think only has a handful of copies themselves. And then Engineer Records has however many they have, because they took a certain number for themselves to distribute in the UK. But like whether or not we did 300 or 200, I think is kind of besides the point. But really what it came down to for me was trying to make a decision based off of they're a brand new band, and I don't want to go too far in, more than I feel is necessary. And also just from a logistic standpoint of physical space,
So this leads me to something else that it kind of brought my curiosity about how. So a while ago, I think you had mentioned before about a conversation where running a record label is, at least in your case, how various people who run independent record labels isn't necessarily the money-making machine that I think some people have the perception that it is. Because of course, when you have major record labels where they do make a lot of money, but they have various things that help them retain that money and then find other ways to be able to receive more of that money back. So I guess what I'm really curious with you is that because it is a constant grind where a lot more money is spent than it is returned, and having to negotiate with the various artists that are signing onto the record label and then trying to have them share what their expectations are and what you can actually offer to them in that respect. But I would also imagine too that there are times along the way that you feel like, is it even worth it anymore? Because it's not an easy path to take on here. But from what I'm gathering here from you, it's clearly obvious, at least from my perspective, that you're still very much passionate about here and you still very much love doing this, from what I can understand. But did you ever feel like this is way too much for me to handle right now, even though you've took that 4-year hiatus, or the thing you mentioned before, and then came back into it here? Obviously, that was kind of a recharge, but do you still notice a lot of the same hurdles you've dealt with before now on your own? Does it become a little bit overwhelming at times where you feel like maybe you should take a step back, or because you had that break and then coming back to it, you're more prepared to how to handle those certain responsibilities that would come down the way that you may not have been prepared beforehand, that you've gotten better with handling now moving forward?
You kind of froze up just for a touch there, so I'm not sure if I heard the entire question, but if I heard correctly, like basically you're asking me like how have I prepared myself for like when things potentially get a little rockier again? Is that basically what you're asking?
Right. So essentially what I was asking is that because you're running a record label, you mentioned before that it's not the money making machine that you have, that most people perceive it to be, where you have a record label, you sign artists, and therefore you having money coming in. And that's not always the case. In fact, you're spending more money than you are getting back. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about how you have handled yourself moving forward, because there's that period of time where you had that 4-year hiatus where you took a break from it because of all the things that occurred along the way, to all the various things you were dealing with at the time, and then coming back from which I imagine you had to recharge to get back into this here. I'm assuming that from that period that you probably had learned a lot about, okay, this is what I need to prepare for now that I'm going back to the swing of things here that I didn't know before. So now moving forward, if this were to happen, I can handle this a lot better. But if something else is completely out of my realm that I had no idea how to handle, I know I can conduct myself more patient. I can be more patient in that process now, because before I probably would have been discombobulated because I had no idea what was going on. So now that I'm able to move forward with this here, I know what my limitations are, and I know how to handle my limitations and know how to push further without overwhelming myself in a lot of ways. So I hope that question made sense with what I was referring to here.
Yeah. No. Yeah, because when I took that break, it really was out of necessity, in that like, I didn't have any resources available for me to continue to do the record label. Like I was in a good amount of like debt, not from the record label, but just like outside of that. Mm-hmm. And so I was like really trying to focus on whittling that down. I was kind of going through, a period of my life where I was feeling, pretty like lost, Mm-hmm. And there was just stuff going on that I was like, you know what, dude, like the record label thing, like there's not really much going on with it right now. Like most of the bands that I worked with had kind of dissolved, and there just wasn't really much happening. So, I just kind of made the decision to put it on the shelf, and it still existed. Like I didn't just completely stop doing it. Like if people asked me about it, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, I still have records. If you want some, I have them, but I'm just not really actively promoting it or doing anything brand new with it, because I was focused on other things. And like, really, I needed to do that because I managed to take that time and energy now that I had available to me, and I turned it around and I did a lot of really cool stuff. And I was able to like actually get out of like that financial pit that I was in. And like, I've got myself into a much better position, and I had some extra money and I had extra time again. So I was like, you know what? I'm now in a better position to do this. So I went ahead and I started it back up. And what was great was that with this kind of renewed spirit and energy, it's been doing better progressively every year than it had when I started it out in the beginning. Like, and I don't know if that was just a matter of just personal growth and perspective, maybe that kind of helped with it. But also right. I think it's a mixture of working with a lot of bands that were maybe a little bit more active, and doing more things. I mean, it's interesting that, a few years into it, the pandemic hits again, and then all of a sudden shit's weird. But, but ironically, during the peak of the pandemic, I've sold more records during those 2 years than I ever have in any other year that I've ever done.
Interesting.
But to kind of get more to your point, or to your question, yeah, I mean, having had the experiences that I've had over the last few years, I feel much more prepared to be able to like address issues as they come up, and to kind of give myself more of a, I guess, a more realistic threshold of what I can and can't do. Interestingly, though, this year, I feel like I have taken on probably maybe a bit too much than I should have. The hard part is that when you get turned on to these bands that are really great, it's sometimes really hard to say no. What's nice though, is that even with some of these things that kind of came up more like last minute that weren't as planned for. I have been able to make them work. The biggest challenge is really trying to give myself enough bandwidth to provide enough specialized attention to each release.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that, you know, I'm trying to spread my energy out evenly, you know, so that each artist gets a certain amount of attention. But something that I've learned, and that I think everyone eventually kind of figures out after you've done this enough, is that each release basically has a window of opportunity to really get the most out of it. And that window is getting smaller and smaller as we go on, because there's so much music being released all the time. And everyone's attention is spread amongst the millions of releases that happen every year, you know, and every week there's thousands and thousands and thousands of releases, you know, and everyone's trying to grab your attention. And so, you know, it's challenging to take a record like the Next Scars record, which is only a year old, right, and still kind of get that attention on it, you know. And I still have to talk about it because I've still got copies of it. I still have to sell those, you know.
So the oversaturation of the music industry, and so here's the thing, because it's interesting that you point that out, because I actually never thought of it that way for music here, but I've talked to various people when it comes to filmmaking, acting directors, producers, things of that, various people in that field. And one of the things I've always asked them about is the various platforms that the films are released now, where it seems like there's more opportunities for the filmmakers to get their movies out there, or TV shows, or whatever the case may be, because you have YouTube, among other things as well. And but the market is oversaturated in all these various genres that it's like it's very hard to get promotions for the said products out there. And I understand you just pointed out for yourself about, you know, getting that window of opportunity, which is getting smaller and smaller as time goes by. Dealing with that aspect of it here for the music side of it here, does that become a little discouraging at times where, like, guys, we can promote this stuff here, but we got to do it now while the iron's still hot, because by next week, someone else is going to come out with another record that's going to come out. And because of their popularity, that window of opportunity for you guys may be completely removed there. So we got to work this out ASAP. So having to deal with that stress in that respect, do you feel like you've gotten better in learning how to conduct yourself with that, and also working with the bands that understand and be able to offer that what's the word I want to use, that understanding the business side of it as well too, where they're not prepared for it, but if they're willing to listen to you and take your word on it, and then figuring out along the way for themselves, how do you feel that it becomes easier for you to manage that more often now, because, you know, just because of the oversaturation that's out there? So I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's never easy to kind of gauge exactly how much and how often you should really like be talking about your music and like your album. Like from a business perspective, right? Like, it's my job to push these records as often as much as I can, because my purpose is to get them out the door and into your hands, right? As a consumer of music, right? So the artist, a lot of times, you know, a lot of musicians, at least this is just my perspective. A lot of musicians that I work with and speak to and are friends with, they don't love like promoting themselves. They don't love going out there and being like, buy our record, blah. You know, it's because it becomes like
a job.
Annoying. It's annoying, you know? And I understand that it is annoying. Like, you're on social media and literally every freaking post is like, buy my record. And it's just like, okay, like, I don't, you know, enough, you know? But I don't know, that it's not a new concept. Like, it's been this way the whole time, you know?
Right.
But, yeah, like, you have to have a plan, and you have to stick to the plan, and you got to see if that plan works, and then you got to kind of see what worked. And there is a very typical standard release cycle, right? It's like you announce the record, you release a single, maybe you follow it up with a video, you release a second single, and then maybe you follow up with a third single, and then a few weeks later the album drops, right? That's a very standard release cycle.
Right.
For a lot of bands that works great because it gives you about 3 months to kind of hype it, and then as you're hyping it, you're trying to really build the buzz for the whole record, and along the way you're adding attention to the bands, you're building your fan base, and then you're doing your pre-order and like all that stuff, and ideally by the time the record comes out, maybe you've sold through half, if not all of them, but because of how much music is constantly being released, it's kind of a fight. You have to like really fight for your audience, and you have to, on top of that, you're dealing with like the tools that we have at our disposal, social media, which is a very I don't know if rigged is even the right word, but it's just like it's.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I know exactly.
What you know what I mean? Like,
I know what you mean.
It's pay to play. Yeah,
I know.
You have to pay to use it.
I'm aware of the cycle, if you will.
Yeah, and so you have to start to really determine what you're comfortable with as far as how you're going to promote it. Now, one thing that I haven't done as well as I should have, and I'm hoping to get there, is to really go ahead and just bite the bullet and start using social media ads more often in the promotion cycle. Yeah. I really hate it, and I've tried to do everything in my power to not have to do that. By that, what I mean is that I've been trying to really encourage not only the individual bands that I'm working with on any given release, but then all of the other bands that I work with, as well as the fan base, to kind of be the hype machine, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you've got hype, like I'm just throwing this out there, I work with about 15 different artists, right? If I've got all 15 of those artists hyping up one artist's release, that's a huge addition to the hype machine, in that they're posting about it, they're talking about it, like they're saying, hey, make sure you check out so and so's new release, it's coming out in like 2 weeks, because all of their audiences now, even if it is only 10% with like the natural social media algorithm, that's still a lot more people than you're reaching through your 10% natural feed push, right? But that's hard. It's hard to get everyone on board with that, right?
Right.
Because your audience is kind of sacred, and also some bands are just better at it than others. Some bands are more open to that than others. I keep on coming back to like the ska scene right now.
Yeah.
The ska scene is very good at hyping each other. They are excellent at it, as a matter of fact.
Yep.
And I mean, they are the perfect example of being able to build an incredible hype machine without having to succumb to using a lot of the pay to play tools that we have to use, because they've just got a very feverish, fervent audience that are just, dude, this release, you got to get it. This release, you got to get it. This release, you got to get it. Like, and they've built
the word of mouth is very strong in that community with when it comes to the music there. Cause that's kind of, I agree with you 100% on that as well too. But I guess what I want to lean to next year, because I actually think with what you just said, that was really interesting, because the side of I think with you, I'm really curious about how you go about this here, because you've talked before about the various things that you do when it comes to, because I believe you said you work full time as well too, on top of running the record label, playing music, and having to deal with the various artists as well too. But for yourself though, in and having to find that balancing act to do all that here, because I'm I think some people don't really understand when it comes to the amount of work that's involved when it comes to what it is you do. I'm sure a lot of people do, but I'm just referring to like the general person, if you will. So when you're having to take the time, to in this case, like for example, you're busy, you have things to do, and then you're giving me the time out of your day to speak with me for a period of time, and then you have other things you're going to be doing as well too. Having to learn to manage that for yourself and playing music, talking about helping promote a group, dealing with the business side of it with the record label, and then going to work full time, and then coming back and doing it all over again. For yourself though, in that respect, does it get a little overwhelming for you at having to learn how to deal with all that? And then if it does, how did you find a way to find a good balancing act to be able to prioritize what's important right now to focus on, then I can focus on A, B, and C later on because these two things are more important for me, like apart from your job. But as far as the record label is concerned and everything else related to that, even to the point where having time to spend time with your loved ones in this case here, and getting the room giving them the room to be able to um, offer them your full attention in that respect without having to be occupied with the various other things that are occurring in your life in the business side of it here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I just kind of have to force the issue. I have to really, give myself firm limits. And there are times when it's harder. The last month has been actually quite challenging. And it's all for good reasons. Like, I mean, I've been working with a few bands that kind of came up as more last minute, releases, where, basically I got introduced to the band, they were ready to go. And, it was like, okay, well, we want to do this. And we already have we already have these things set in motion. And I'm like, okay, like, sure. Like, I like the music, but like, usually this is like planned months in advance, and this is only like a month in advance. So what are we going to do here? So there was a lot of scrambling going on, but thankfully, a lot of the stuff that would normally require planning had already been done.
Okay.
So it was less work, but you had a smaller window, so it still felt a little hectic, but it worked out. And I mean, thankfully all the releases now have been, announced and are either live or they're going to be live here really soon. And we've already got like all the dates and time table set up, and like things are in motion. But in terms of like making time for myself and for all of my other priorities, I mean, my job thankfully has a certain degree of flexibility to it. So there are ways for me to kind of dip in and dip out when I, feel it's appropriate.
Right.
Like usually between the hours of like 9 and 5, I don't really do much for the label. But every now and again, I'll just like, I'll answer a text or I'll answer an email or something like that. But then once my workday is over, then I give myself like a few hours to kind of like dedicate to the label. Right. My wife has a full-time job as well. And she actually, I mean, in a lot of ways, she works a lot harder than I do, for her job. So there's times where, where we don't have a lot of time to spend together anyway, because her job is pretty demanding. So those weeks, oftentimes I can kind of play catch up and do a lot of stuff because I have more time to be by myself, after work. But when she is not working longer hours, I definitely try to make at least a few hours a day to spend with her. Like, we'll definitely like eat dinner together and like watch a TV show or something like that. And then on weekends, I try to free up my weekends as much as I can, to spend time with her or to go to concerts. We'll go see friends, or, like the next couple of weekends we have traveling that we have going on. So that'll be really great. Like one of, be worrying about any kind of label stuff. And then with stuff with like Tsunami Bomb, for the last 2 years, the band hasn't really been super active. I mean, like, we've been writing music and we've been kind of demoing stuff. And, only recently have we been really like kind of turning things back up, because we've got some shows coming up, and we're still prepping for this new album that we're going to be putting out. Hopefully, hopefully early next year. But it's all kind of depending on what's going on. But I guess the short answer is that I've gotten really, really great at having a calendar. So, yeah.
Well, so this was something I'm curious to learn about you, because so when it comes to the industry overall, I'm wondering if anything for yourself has changed on your perception, how you look at the overall industry in itself, because you play music, and you were in Tsunami Bomb, but running the label as well too, and understanding the various sides of how that industry works, albeit a independent side of it, but you still have a clear understanding about how that engine works. Has anything from your perspective changed about how you look at the industry from what you were when you first got into a band or first starting the record label, and then how things have progressed along the way, that you realize that this has changed a great deal in how I look at this, and this. And therefore, I know that when I'm looking at these things, these are the priorities I have to focus on more, because in order for this to help with the business, I have to be very careful about how I'm going to approach things a little more effectively for me to be able to prioritize my time on these things. And especially when a band comes up to you and says, "Hey, I want you to sign our group here because we believe we fit for what the label is all about." And you have to vet them out in that respect as well too. So there's various things you have to do to look out for the best interest. Excuse me, for the business. I'm sorry, for the label, from a business perspective here too, that maybe you didn't consider before, and you've learned along the way as you progress that what are more important things to be focusing on, rather than some more trivial things that you probably didn't think or where you probably thought were important or no longer important for you, because now you have the experience of having to focus on taking care of the brand. As a result of that, also learn how to take care of yourself to be able to maintain the business running. So I hope the question makes sense, but if you didn't understand, I'll be happy to repeat it again if need be.
No, I think I understand. Yeah, I mean, well, when I was younger and playing in bands, trying to get on labels, I mean, my understanding of what labels did was, essentially that they helped facilitate the release of a record through the promotion cycle and help with distribution. And there was like there was oftentimes like this kind of, I guess, expectation that the label would get you in front of other people that were going to help elevate your band in other ways. So like, for example, if you got signed to, say, Fat Records, that, I mean, and this is all just me kind of like this is all speculation because I don't know, but based on the pattern that I saw was that, well, if you got signed to Fat Records, then you automatically got like a great booking agent, and you automatically got like a great PR person, because I think that they had these connections with these really great booking agents and PR agents that are like, yeah, like you sign with us and like, we're going to basically get you connected with them. And then you have these great agencies working for you now outside of that. And I know that not every label has that, or offered that, like Lookout Records. Like, I don't know if Lookout Records like ever like really offered like booking help, or anything like that. Asian Man Records, same thing. Like, I don't know if they really like connected their bands with like booking agents, per se. But when I started the label with my homies back, when we started out in earnest, like part of what we wanted to do was we kind of wanted to make like this one-stop shop for bands where we wanted to have kind of everything at their disposal. So like one person would be like a booking agent, and like kind of handle that for them.
Right.
And that was this whole idea that we had, which wasn't a new idea. Like it wasn't like a new concept by any stretch, but what we found out pretty early was that it was kind of unnecessary. Like a lot of that stuff like didn't really, you didn't need it, especially with like the types of bands that we were working with, because they weren't really out there like going on like national tours or anything like that.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So in a lot of ways, I guess my perspective has changed in that, I don't know. Like, I mean, I guess based on the types of bands that I work with and like maybe like the age of the people in the bands that I work with. Well, I mean, the last couple of years have been so weird too, because like even if bands wanted to tour, they couldn't, you know? So like maybe maybe I'm not answering this correctly. Like at the end of the day, like I feel like a label still like has the same purpose, that it always had. But I've never really, I guess, especially since the label started back up, had this I guess table of things to offer bands that were any different than I think any other label would offer.
Okay.
Like I can help facilitate the production of a release. I can help facilitate the marketing cycle of a release. I can help with other odds and ends, like making connections, potentially getting you onto some festivals and stuff like that. And then otherwise, that's what I'm kind of here for, is to, as you mentioned before, like I try to make myself like a partner with the band,
Right. Right.
But yeah, I mean, and hopefully that answers the question. Yeah,
it does. Well, the thing is that I'm not really sure what, I mean, because I don't know what the answer is going to be. So that's why I guess the way that I asked it probably wasn't the best way to go about it, because I was trying to figure out a way to try to get to the point here. But so this actually leads me to one thing that I want to ask you about. If I'm curious about having an artist or a group or a musician that comes out to you and says, "Hey, we have this style of music that we want to play. We want to know if you'd be interested in signing us for the record label." And it's something that's completely out of the realms of what Sell Hard Record is mostly known for here. So I'm not sure. I believe you may have answered the question before in the past, but I just don't recall off the top of my head here. So I'm curious if you can probably answer it now for me. Where if there's a style of music that you are mostly wanted to stick with here because of the identity of the type of groups you sign up with here. You have groups like Decent Criminal, Middle Aged Queers, and many other groups of that sort that have a certain style of music that is consistent from what many people would probably assume that Sell Heart Record is releasing. But if you have someone coming out of left field that is completely different out of those style of music, hardcore metal bands or rap artists, if they come up to you and say, "Hey, we're really interested in signing with your record label because we love the various music you guys have, but we play this style of music. Are you willing to check us out to looking as a potential sign up here for the group or for the label here?" Because I don't think there's limitations when it comes to what Sell the Heart Record is looking out for, but I'm curious if that's something that did cross your mind about the possibilities that if something comes out of left field that is not the norm for Sell the Heart Records, is there any slight hesitation about how you approach that?
I mean, yeah, in honesty, yeah, there would probably be a bit of a hesitation. Just like if a jazz band were to hit me up and be like, "Yeah, like we like what you're doing," I'd be like, "Okay, well, I love jazz. I certainly love jazz. I don't necessarily know how to market jazz.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously an audience for jazz.
Right.
Hell, there's probably an audience within the Sell the Heart audience that loves jazz.
Right.
I wouldn't be opposed to it at all, especially if I really liked the music. I actually had a person who was a hip hop artist hit me up not that long ago, and yeah, they hit me up and they're like, "Yeah, I'm looking for a label, and just wanted to see what you thought." And I thought it was cool. I was honest with him. I said, "Hey, I'll be honest, man. I think it's fine. I think it's good music. I'm not necessarily sure I would be the best fit for you because I'm not a hip hop label. I've never released a hip hop album. I'm not opposed to it. I love good hip hop music, but I guess it just depends on what your expectations are and what it is that you would want, and what are you seeking out of a label." And he gave me some answers that I was like, "Okay, well, I mean, I can do some of that, but I can't do everything." And I just kind of politely said, respectfully, I think maybe just keep on looking around, and if you want to continue to have a conversation, I'm willing to have a conversation with you. But I think for now, it's probably best that you consider seeking out a different label that maybe specializes in promoting hip hop,
Right.
But nothing is off the table as far as I'm concerned with Sell the Heart Records. Like I don't consider us like a punk label. I don't consider us to be like an indie rock label. I don't consider us to be, I mean, if anything, we're an indie rock label, I guess you could say, because it's rock music amongst varying genres that are all basically independent,
Right.
So, I mean, if you're thinking of it in technical terms, but, I've worked with ska bands, I've worked with goth bands, I've worked with post-rock bands, I've worked with punk bands. I'm willing to work with anyone that is writing good music, has a good energy, and they're good, decent people that are willing to work hard, and honestly work as hard as I am, if not harder, and ultimately what I'm trying to do is to curate a group of albums and bands. I mean, like, to me, the albums are kind of more important, I mean, the bands of course matter at the end of the day, like,
Right.
But like I guess what I mean by that is that if there's a band that comes to me with an album and I like that album, but maybe I wasn't as keen on their older stuff, I'd still be willing to work with that band because that album is great. Right. Mm-hmm. And as long as they're decent people, so.
Okay. Is there any particular group that kind of caught you by surprise when they first approached you and said, and you don't have to name any names if you want, but I just want to get a perspective about how someone approached you about their music and you listened to them and thought it's okay, but then somewhere along the way something had changed where you realize, these guys are actually a lot better than I thought from my last interaction with them, or my last listening of their music, that you thought I can work with them here in this capacity because I think they are going to offer something unique that could either, I'm not saying propel the business, propel the label, but offer something unique to the label where people can identify this group and say, I like this group, what label are they signed to, and help in that respect there. So I'm wondering if you have a little bit of that where you've come across with a group or various other groups that you didn't think much, I'm not want to say think much, but just weren't so hot on, and then your perception changed as time went by, and then you thought it'd be a good idea to bring them on board to be a part of the Sell the Heart record family, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, yes, like there's been a few where it's been presented to me, and I'm not going to name any names, but there's been a few that have come to me that initially, like, I was a little bit more, I guess you could say, like, lukewarm to the idea.
Yeah.
Where I was like, yeah, I mean, I dig this and it's fine, but like, I want to give it some time, and then ultimately, through conversations and, just kind of digging into the music a little bit more.
Right.
It just, it felt like, okay, yeah, this would work, typically, I would prefer that. And if an album is presented to me and by a band, that, things would just kind of be like, yes, like that's a yes.
Right.
But I know that sometimes that's just not the case. And, not that this has necessarily happened for me, but there could be the case that, maybe a band will come along that, you're not really that into, but that it would make good sense to work with them. Right. Because it, like, by working with them, it would elevate everything,
Right.
And I mean, that's of course something that could happen at some point. But I don't know. I mean, really at the end of the day, I really want to work with artists and records that I actually care about. Right. Because I want it to have like a degree of like integrity to it, where it's like, no, I actually really like this record. Like, I like it. I listen to it. I think you should listen to it. Because I mean, if I was running this purely as a means of making money, as solely as a business, and I had less, I guess, interest in the individual albums, then sure, like I'd be like, yeah, like I mean, if it makes sense financially to bring you in, even if I'm not as like thrilled on the record, then sure, like we could do that. But at the end of the day, like I don't really feel super comfortable doing that, and that wouldn't be my preference. Yeah.
Interesting. I just wanted to just more or less kind of close up with saying something here, because you said something that was really interesting for me, which is that I find to be really refreshing from what you said here, is that I mean, yes, this is a business, and I understand, and as well as you understand it too. But what I found to be really interesting, what you just said before, was that you're not interested in necessarily just finding what's going to be good to bring more money for the record label, but rather keeping the integrity of what you feel is good to, I mean, that you can honestly promote and say, this is really good. And we invested time with this group. Therefore, we believe in them. Therefore, we believe that you should listen to them because they offer something unique that you could take away from and hopefully enjoy, and so on and so forth. I understand that, when people get the impression that you're running a label, it is a business, and I know what it is, and so do you, but the integrity that comes with that too is kind of something that I think some people kind of lose that perception, who may not be aware how things run, that I think is really important to maintain. And I think that because you have the ability to do that and actually look into the artists and take the time to invest with them and converse with them, just as you shared before, that's something that is something that I believe, I wouldn't say is lost, but it's refreshing to hear that it's still out there in various ways. So the fact that you share that, I really do appreciate that. But so in closing here, I wanted to say thank you because, when I reached out to you before, I'll be honest with you, when I didn't get a response back, I figured you were busy because I follow you on social media accounts, and I know that you have various things that you're working on here. But there was a part of me that wondered, if I don't take the step to reach out to you, I may never hear back at all. So I'm glad that I did that, because I really wanted to hear your perspective on the various things you've gone through to, and what you've been through to be able to get to this point right now, and where your mindset is at this point, and what you expect to how to evolve as a person as a result, and help the record label become something more than just a place where people create music, but to create something that's really meaningful for them to come back and revisit here. So there's a lot that I've taken away from this conversation in that respect that I do really, truly appreciate here. But I'm wondering if there's anything in closing that you would like to say as far as what people can look out for, because I know there's a lot of things you have in the pipeline, but I'm not sure if there's anything you can reveal right now about what people can be expecting for Sell the Heart record that they could look out for any upcoming artists that are anticipating a release for the new record, that you are able to either share, or what to look out for in the upcoming future for Sell the Heart record.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a few records that are coming out that have already been announced. They their release date we haven't crossed that bridge yet. So, okay. Recently we announced that the band Emblems, who are from Chicago,
I've heard of them.
We're going to be releasing a record for them. And the way that we're doing it is we're doing it with two different things. So we're not actually by default releasing a physical format. What we're going to do is we're going to have a custom t-shirt that you can order. And with that, you get a digital copy of the record, or you can buy a digital copy of the record. But on top of that, what we're doing is a kind of like a crowdsourcing vinyl release, where what we're going to do is we're going to put it out there and say, hey, we want to release this on vinyl, but we really only want to do it if you want it. So we need enough people to tell us that they want it, and then we'll press it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I did that earlier this year with Datura and Original Sun, and it worked. Like, we had enough people who expressed interest in buying a record that we felt comfortable pressing it. And it was one of those things where, they were kind of newer bands,
right? And
out of the gate, I didn't feel as comfortable putting out the expense to do vinyl for them. But I threw it out there. I said, we could just do this as like a crowdsourcing effort, where we say, all right, we want to do it on vinyl. We have a way to do it. Do you want it on vinyl? And enough people said, yes, we do. And we gave ourselves like a basically like we have to hit this benchmark in order for us to press it on vinyl, and we hit it, and so we did it, and so we're going to try that with emblems as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I don't know any more. I feel like that's an appropriate way to do it, because I don't know. I mean, I'm not so much a believer anymore that you should do it just because you can. Does that make sense?
I understand exactly what you mean. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, do you collect vinyl?
I do actually. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know how many records you have. I have hundreds. You know.
Yeah, quite a few myself.
Yeah, and so eventually I'm gonna run out of room. So
yeah, I know.
You know, I gotta either start becoming very discerning as to which records I buy, which I try to be anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I try to be very careful about only buying records that I will actually play.
Right.
Selective
is the way I look at it for myself. Yeah.
But there's a lot of good music. You
yeah.
know? So it's easy to kind of get that out of the hands. And you know, vinyl takes up about that much space on the shelf, but it's about that long, you know, so eventually it starts to add up. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that going forward, I'm trying to be a lot more meticulous in terms of the physical formats and how much of anything we're going to do. But anyway, that's emblems. So that actually comes out in July, but we're going to be doing this crowdsourcing effort to try to see if they want to do it on vinyl. And if we get enough people who are interested, we're going to do a very small vinyl release. There's a few other albums that I haven't announced yet. So there's an album by the band Snipers, which is actually my old band, that I'm actually doing a reissue on vinyl. So it's the album that's already available. You can find it online. It's digitally available. It's called Let the Wolves Eat Themselves. But I just went ahead and I wanted to release it on vinyl, and I went ahead and I did a small run of vinyl. So I'm releasing that actually sometime in July. It'll be available. It actually might be available at the end of June. But anyway, it'll be available by the time this hits.
Okay.
And then there's an anthology that I'm releasing for a band called Hopelifter, which is no longer around. They were a short-lived East Bay kind of hardcore punk band that features ex-members of Screw 32 and the band AAA, who are from Sonora, and various other bands. But they were only around for about a year, but they released 2 EPs that I just absolutely loved, and I was stoked on those records when they came out. And you know, as time went on, I discovered that you couldn't find them anywhere. And like I had long since given up, you know, playing CDs, and I was like, you know what? I love this music. I think other people would really like this music. So I talked with the band and I was like, hey, would you guys have any interest in like compiling these into one 12-inch record? And they were like, yes, we should totally do that. So I connected with the band, and they were fully on board. And so we've repackaged it, and it's like this really cool 12-inch with one of the EPs on side A, the other EP on side B. And yeah, that's coming out. We're going to start pushing it out in July.
Are they expected to do a show too as a result of that release?
Probably not. No.
Okay.
It's not that it's complicated. It's just that, you know, everyone's kind of spread out, and everyone's a lot older, and they have lives, you know, outside of like music. And, you know, it's not completely outside of the realms of possibility. There has been talk about it, but I don't expect it to happen. But if it does, like, you know, we'll definitely let them know. And then there are at least 5 other releases that I'm not really at liberty to announce yet, because we won't have announced anything by the time this comes out. But
gotcha.
Needless to say, there's a lot happening this year still that hasn't been talked about. So this year is absolutely the busiest year for Sell the Heart. And I would highly recommend that people consider signing up for our Bandcamp subscription, because you pay $5 a month and you get all of the music that we release digitally.
And I'll be sure to make sure to have all the links in the description down below for everyone to keep an eye out for that as well too, to help out with as well. But so in closing here for the camera, I did want to say thank you so much for giving me the time here, because I know you're very busy, and I appreciate you in telling the various stories you have told me in this episode, where there's a lot that I did learn about your perspective and how things have changed along the way when it comes to the industry, which I was not really privy to. So having the time for you to share that with me really did teach me a lot. So if anything, I want to say thank you for that, but also thank you so much for looking out for the best interest in what is important for you to promote great artists out there. Because there's a lot of artists that I've come across through Sell Hard Record that I've become fans of just simply by you posting it on there for me to be aware of. So if anything, thank you for that, because I really do appreciate and you doing your absolute best to look out for great artists that most people have never heard of, and hope in time people pick up and carry with them along the way there. So anything, thank you so much for giving me the time to do that here with you.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I really appreciate what you're doing here. And, it's great that you asked me to come on here. And, I do apologize for the delay in getting back to you initially, but yeah, I kind of scrambling the last few weeks have been pretty gnarly, but no, it meant a lot for you to reach out, and I appreciate you following back up. This has been a really good experience. I appreciate all that you're doing too. So thank you.
All right.